Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menyaksikan Niaga AWANI bersama saya Rozman, dan dalam jam ini kami akan bawakan pelbagai perkembangan terkini niaga, ekonomi termasuk juga dengan pasaran dari tempatan hingga ke antarabangsa. Dan saya akan mulakan dengan laporan mengenai WEF dulu, di mana mesyuarat khas Forum Ekonomi Dunia WEF menjadi platform untuk Malaysia menggemakan keterbukaan jalinan kerjasama untuk melonjakkan ekonomi negara seiring 3 hasrat yang menjadi tema forum ini: kerjasama global, pertumbuhan dan tenaga untuk pembangunan. Hari ketiga lawatan Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim di Riyadh, Arab Saudi membawa wawasan Malaysia memperkasa hubungan bilateral antara negara selain perbincangan mengenai pelaburan dan usaha memperkasakan jalinan kerjasama sedia ada.
Sesi dengan Bank Pembangunan Islam yang menyambut 50 tahun kewujudan dan kegiatan dia. Kemudian dalam beberapa pertemuan dengan Perdana Menteri beberapa negara, termasuk Iraq di malam tu, dan kemudian Pakistan, Qatar, Jordan, Rwanda. Okay. Itu dari segi mengambil kesempatan daripada kehadiran mereka untuk memperkukuh hubungan dua hala, terutama dalam bidang perdagangan dan pelaburan. Kemudian dengan kehadiran kita memanfaatkan dengan Suruhanjaya Security untuk ada hubungan meningkatkan keupayaan kekuatan pelaburan kewangan dan dana Islam yang melibatkan juga Suruhanjaya Security, Bank Negara, Kementerian Kewangan, Khazanah dan Bank Pembangunan Islam.
Beliau kata demikian dalam sidang media sempena mesyuarat khas WEF pada Isnin. Turut menyertai sidang media itu Menteri Luar, Muhammad Hassan dan Menteri Pelaburan, Perdagangan dan Industri MITI, Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz. Antara lain yang menjadi sorotan hasil perbincangan pada Isnin termasuk pelaburan dua nama gergasi dalam industri hiliran minyak dan gas global, Saudi Aramco serta Syarikat Nasional Petronas dengan nilai pelaburan sehingga $8 bilion.
Ya, perbincangan kita dengan beberapa syarikat juga utama, terutama yang akan mengambil keputusan untuk melabur di Malaysia. Saya tahu dengan Petronas yang dihadiri juga oleh Tan Sri Tengku Taufik mengenai penyertaan Aramco secara besar-besaran di Pengarang. Kemudian beberapa rundingan di antara syarikat dengan Khazanah yang diwakili oleh saudara Amir Faisal, dan kemudian dalam kita ambil kesempatan juga untuk bincang lagi melalui penjelasan oleh MITI, Tengku Zafrul dengan syarikat utama.
Mesyuarat itu yang berlangsung selama 2 hari di Pusat Konvensyen Raja Abdul Aziz dihadiri ketua-ketua negara serta kerajaan selain pemimpin industri. Dalam masa lawatan itu, Datuk Seri Anwar dan delegasi Malaysia terus mengadakan mesyuarat meja bulat bersama lebih 50 pemimpin industri dan perniagaan pelbagai sektor dari seluruh pelosok dunia di mesyuarat khas WEF.
Current geopolitical tensions in the Middle East are currently posing the greatest threats to regional stability and global economic security. And to discuss further on this, we have ready on the line is Dr. Shankar Nambia, Head of Research Mayor. I want to say thank you very much, Dr. Nambia, for joining us. Firstly, to what extent do geopolitical tensions in the Middle East impact cross-border trade and supply chain operation, particularly in key industries such as oil and gas, manufacturing, and even one of the biggest sector within the S&P 500, it's the technology?
I think given the sensitivity of the Middle East and the fact that you just had the unresolved Israel-Gaza conflict, that has been compounded by the Iran-Israel conflict, which, however, seems to be contained at this point. And this is in addition to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which hasn't quite been resolved yet. You could see an exacerbation of what's going on there, depending on how the conflict rolls out and how the US responds. So given all these overlapping concerns, and given the fact that the Middle East is a particularly sensitive point, I think the kind of impact you would have on the global economy and on what therefore happens to Malaysia could be significant. A matter of immediate, of pressing concern is, of course, what happens to the price of oil. And not just the price of oil, although that is a particularly sticking point. There is, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, and there is a possibility that the strait could be restricted, constricted. And if that happens, then you have higher travel costs. Ships would have to take a longer route, which would add to the cost of logistics. So you have a whole complex of issues arising, and two in particular. One is the price of oil, which, if tensions escalate, could see the price of could see a super hike in the price of oils, reaching perhaps 100, 120 US dollars per barrel. So it is of course a significant threat.
As you mentioned, the heavy potential risk from the geopolitical event could cause the pressure on the oil and gas, and even the pressure on the cost of the logistics. Then how do geopolitical risks intersect with other macroeconomic factors, such as the monetary policy, fiscal policy, and technological innovation? And what are the implications for policymakers in managing all of these complex interactions?
You're absolutely right, Nina. I mean, it's really a very complex landscape that we have to navigate. That there is, you have the kind of implications that would arise, that would probably put in place inflationary pressures. You also have to take into account what the US, what the Fed might or might not do. We were counting on rate cuts from the US, and in the event of the price of oil going up, you might not see these rate cuts. With inflationary pressures, the Fed might be tempted to keep the rates at where it is, perhaps even raise them, and that's not going to be a good thing for us. And then, of course, you also have the role of technology, in particular AI, and there would be jobs being created, yes, but you also have the possibility of job losses in certain sectors. So, yes, absolutely right. You have a whole complex of issues coming up, and I think it needs a great deal of agility. It needs a great deal of caution in being able to navigate these risks. And of course, I mean, you have at your disposal the right kind of monetary policy measures to put in place, as well as fiscal policy measures that could be put in place. Some of these effects we probably could anticipate. For instance, we could easily see that all of these tensions could result in inflationary pressures in the price of goods, of commodities in the country going up. We saw it happening with the Russia-Ukraine crisis. You could see something similar rolling out in the months ahead, should there be an escalation of conflict in the Middle East.
And we can also, the conflict about the Middle East has also been highlighted and been addressed within the platform of the World Economic Forum. And Dr. Nambia, in what ways that WEF in Riyadh can leverage its platform to even foster dialogue, cooperation and even innovative solutions among the key stakeholders to address the interconnected challenges posed by geopolitical risks and ensure sustainable economic development?
I think one of the key issues that will be discussed at WEF is how you would handle security and cooperation amidst an increasingly complicated global economy and with all these geopolitical tensions. So we have our sights on the right issues. WEF is, of course, looking at security and cooperation. It's also looking at growth and job creation, the role of AI, and, of course, climate change. All terribly important issues. And in particular, as with reference to our conversation right now, I'm sure the tensions in the Middle East will occupy center stage, and this is a point where cooperation, trade is more important than at any other point. And we will have, hopefully, WEF will discuss strategies on how collaboration could be intensified as it's particularly necessary at this point, collaboration, cooperation, and greater trade. And I think up to this point, from the reports that I've been hearing, I think our Prime Minister is doing an excellent job of showcasing the Malaysian story, and I'm quite sure he would do what is necessary to attract the right kind of investment. And I think that's absolutely essential going forward and given the difficult times we are likely to face.
Dr. Nambia, we have a balance of less than 1 minute. Maybe you can share with us what are the best risk management strategies that can investors adapt in times of the heightened geopolitical risks. Please, Doctor.
I think the best way of handling these risks is to adopt, to the extent possible, proactive measures, and we have been going through a number of these issues. I mean, for instance, we saw with COVID that it is important to look at supply chain resilience, at the smooth flow of logistics. So I think we've learned, or we should have learned the right lessons. I think we need to put these things in place. We've also seen how these tensions could result in pressures on the simplest of things.
All right.
For instance, the price of chicken feed, chicken eggs, etc. So we've had some experience with previous issues, so I think we'd have the right risk mitigating measures.
All right, Doctor, I want to say thank you very much to Dr. Shankar Nambia, the head of research MIA, for helping understand about addressing the economic spillover from the Middle East tension from one of the focus within the World Economic Forum. And definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in all@astrawani.com. Dan itu adalah sedikit perkembangan mengenai iaitu bagaimanakah perubahan ataupun tekanan geopolitik terutamanya di Timur Tengah dan Asia Barat juga diberi penekanan terhadap di platform iaitu Mesyuarat Forum Ekonomi Dunia WEF. Dan selain daripada isu itu juga isu lain juga turut diberi tumpuan termasuk juga dengan perubahan iklim yang ketika ini telah meninggalkan impak yang ketara kepada kesihatan planet. Justru global pada ketika ini memberi tumpuan khusus kepada usaha peralihan tenaga. Editor kanan Niaga Awani Najib Aroff ada perinciannya dari Riyadh, Arab Saudi seiring mesyuarat khas Forum Ekonomi Dunia.
Mesyuarat khas World Economic Forum di Riyadh, Arab Saudi ini sudah pasti memberikan tumpuan antaranya adalah peralihan tenaga. Nah, peralihan tenaga ini kalau kita melihat adalah bagaimanakah cabarannya berbeza negara, khususnya negara maju di Global North dan juga negara membangun di Global South sebagai contoh. Bagaimanakah ini boleh dicantumkan? Di Malaysia kita ada New Energy Transition Roadmap NETR sebagai contoh. Namun kita juga berdepan dengan kesukaran dari segi progres kita dan juga dari segi mewujudkan lebih banyak pelaburan dalam aspek dan konteks peralihan tenaga. Bukan saja di Malaysia, ini tidak unik di Malaysia tapi juga di serantau dan juga bahkan negara-negara lain di peringkat dunia juga. Itu yang ingin saya bincangkan. Saya bersama dengan Roberto Boca, Head of Center for Energy and Materials, member of the Executive Committee World Economic Forum. Thank you so much, Roberto, for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, let's just I'm going to give you a generic question first to understand better about the energy transition, right? Energy security, especially critical concern among countries, especially to those regions that are prone to geopolitical risks, right? But how can nations balance the pursuit of energy security with the need of sustainable and also inclusive energy development on a global scale?
So you're raising the most challenging, most important point of the energy transition. Energy transition is not just one thing. According to geography where you are, some people think of energy transition as sustainability. If you go to your region, probably you're thinking energy transition more as a security or even an equity issue. So these are the three dimensions of the energy transition, and this is the challenge, is really moving the three dimensions together. If you pull on one side, you risk to not cover the other one. So if you go too much renewable too fast with too high cost, then your equitable part, so your affordability, will be damaged if you put it in this way. So this is really the challenge that we have been discussing in these days, and there are a lot of good news, but let's see if this is what you want to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk about the gap first, because, you know, that's the kind of discussion that we have here, because the global north countries especially, we're talking about, oh, you know, developing nations should do more in terms of investment in energy transition. But for developing nations, they are facing quite a difficult time in determining and also deciding how much investment should they put forth and put forward, especially right after the pandemic COVID-19, right? Because they are still in the midst of correcting the economy and all that. But how do we strike a balance? How do we understand that there's going to be a different level of energy transition from different regions and this should be accepted globally?
Yeah, so definitely, and again, you know, people are talking about a differentiation energy transition and multi-speed energy transition, etc. I think this is being recognized. But again, if we think of the energy transition at the three dimension of the energy triangle that you articulated, it's very important that everyone is going through the transition. It's just that in some countries the transition will bring more access and more sustainability in others and more equity in others. So I think that's one element. To your point on the investment, I think the common belief is that more money needs to go to emerging markets, but everybody is pretty clear that the money cannot come only from the emerging markets. So there is that recognition. Now the question is, how can we make sure that the investment flow more in emerging markets, because that's where the demand growth is, how we can make sure this happen there. And so if today the interest rate in an emerging economies are higher, the premium for the risk are higher, etc., how you can reduce that? We have done a study where we're showing really the capital cost is much higher in emerging economies than others, but that's where the demand for energy is. So we have really to find those financial mechanisms to reduce that premium in a way, so that more money flow in emerging economy, as you suggested.
And of course, the World Economic Forum, you know, gives a huge focus for the agency of energy transition. But given the diverse energy landscape and also varying the economy context across regions, how can countries, you know, ensure a just and also equitable transition that leaves no one behind? For instance, in Malaysia, it's quite a challenge for us to get all the industry players to be on the same page, especially for MSMEs, which is our backbone of the economy. But how do we understand connecting all these dots before we can go to the next level of energy transition?
Look, the first element that we all need to understand is the triangle, and we talk about it. The second is the complexity of the transition, and you are hinting to it. A couple of elements. One thing where everybody can work, especially the industrial sector, but also the building sector and the transport sector, is transforming the energy demand. We have done a study that came up saying around the world there is 31% of the energy we use that we could spare, we could not use without losing any output. So effectively, we are wasting 31%. We are talking about $2 trillion a year that the global economy is wasting. So there is one element where the ecosystem of industrial ecosystem that you have in the country can really work together and say, okay, how we optimize our energy consumption across the value chain? Point one. Point two, when you have economic zone where you have a cluster of company working, in an industrial cluster, we call it, how company together they optimize? Because you see, many companies have their own objective to reduce their emission, but rarely they work across value chain and across location like a cluster. So these are huge opportunities that we have seen that are really paying off in terms of optimizing the carbon emission or reducing the carbon emission, creating jobs and creating GDP growth. So there are mechanisms.
Yeah, but is there any possibility that we can have like best practices that a country can learn from other regions, given that we have different background, economic background, and also economic circumstances? Is there such
Absolutely,
thing? Yeah.
absolutely. This is exactly. So there are the two dimensions. Every country has a different transition. That's a fact. But there are a lot of things we can learn from each other, and then locally you can adapt. And to this extent, we have now a group of leaders that got together from 40 organizations, ministerial and CEO of company, that is trying to lead this. Is creating a playbook of all those best practices to be shared. And then the idea is really to work on them, and every country then can pick what is relevant for them. But definitely this is what we are trying to do.
But do you foresee, I want to go a little bit deeper, but do you foresee the geopolitical tensions that's happening currently, be it in Ukraine or in Middle East, will hinder the efforts of energy transition globally?
They might. We're working to avoid that.
Yeah.
The classical things that I heard saying, oh, we shouldn't buy Chinese solar panel because they are coming from one geography. And well, the climate piece is a more important one from some extent. And so I think if you look at what China has done, has really taken down the cost of solar panel for the world, or solar energy for the world. So we should buy. In parallel, I also see the reason why people want to build their own supply chain, because that's also creating job and opportunity. But we shouldn't wait for new supply chain to be created while we can use the current one. So we should do the two in parallel, so that wouldn't slow it down.
Then we have to be a little bit relaxed on the tariff war as well for the Chinese product and all that. Is that happening right now?
If this is happening or not is another thing. But my view on this is really we should look at where there is the cheapest, and as long as it's following the right criteria, of course, we should leverage it while we build alternatives if people have concern from the long-term sustainability, resilience of the supply chain.
Yeah.
But definitely it's an opportunity that shouldn't be lost.
Right. My last question, how do you foresee the Southeast Asia, especially if you can compare with other regions, or the way forward for Southeast Asia in terms of energy transition? How far are we behind, or how far are we in front, or where are we right now?
Well, one thing that is good, and actually mid-June we'll be releasing our energy transition index. Yeah. So we'll be ranking 120 countries. And so I cannot tell you yet how it's doing, but I can tell you that the ingredients to be successful in that is having clear roadmaps. Because when you have clear roadmaps, and a classical example on this is for me the UAE, the country next door, and also Saudi Arabia to some extent, where the country has put a clear vision and a clear roadmap, and then the implementation, of course, is the tough part.
Yep.
But already having clear roadmap is really, really a helpful way to incentivize investment, and for people to understand that yes, investment will be needed, and so we can trust the system. So hopefully in 2 months I will be able to tell you that the region and Malaysia is doing very well.
All right, we shall contact you in the 2 months' time. Thank you so much, Roberto, for your time. As busy guy, I have to let him go. Thank you so much for explaining and also making us understanding about the energy transition. Itu adalah antara sedikit apa yang kita bincangkan di sini. Ini semua akan dirangkumkan kerana kita melihat bahawa cabaran ini tidak boleh diselesaikan secara bersendiri. Perlu ada kerjasama di peringkat antarabangsa, terutama negara maju dan juga negara membangun. Sekian saja laporan saya untuk Astro AWANI.
Penduduk di Krung telah terdedah dengan radiasi untuk beberapa tahun lepas.
Ini bukti terbaru kes Azlina yang hilang 10 tahun lepas.
Kau kerja dengan siapa, Asi? Jawab!
Kau bawa mencak.
Kamera Mama ni memang something. Dia print gambar-gambar ni semua sendiri. Orang dalam gambar tu, kita boleh tolong dia orang.
Selamatkan. Lepas tu ramai lagi mati.
Kau jangan ikut sangat gambar-gambar ni. Just because it's showing you what's going to happen doesn't mean you can change it.
Ni gambar aku mati, Lia. Macam mana boleh keluar?
Aku tak tahu, Edi. Tapi kalau kita tak buat benda ni, kita semua akan mati.
Ini bukan kerja orang biasa. Ini warning.
Framed, tayangan perdana 3 Mei on demand dan di saluran-saluran berikut.
Kumpulan Wang Simpanan Pekerja KWSP dikatakan bukan satu-satunya organisasi yang bertanggungjawab dari segi menambah baik kehidupan masyarakat. Namun KWSP telah memperkenalkan akaun fleksibel yang berkuat kuasa mulai 11 Mei 2024 depan dengan wujudnya satu lagi akaun baru menjadikannya sebanyak 3 akaun secara keseluruhan. Bagaimana pengurusan kewangan persaraan selepas ini dan apakah antara pendekatan terbaik untuk tingkatkan lagi literasi kewangan dalam kalangan masyarakat daripada langkah ini? Kita mempersilakan tetamu kita Profesor Madya Dr. Rozman Abdul Latif merupakan pengarah program MBA Putra Business School PBS. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Doktor kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami pada jam ini. Bercakap mengenai akaun ketiga, akaun fleksibel ini, mungkin Doktor boleh kongsikan apakah antara kelebihan dan risiko adanya 3 akaun ini yang akan mempengaruhi poket setiap individu selepas ini, terutama di bawah 55 tahun. Bagaimana Doktor?
Ya, apabila kita melihat kepada pengumuman oleh KWSP bahawa akaun ketiga ataupun akaun fleksibel akan diwujudkan, ini sebenarnya mengambil kira situasi semasa pola pekerjaan rakyat kita, yang mana kalau sebelum ini mungkin dengan gaji yang kita ada cukup untuk kita mencarum untuk persaraan dan selebihnya untuk menangani sara hidup seharian. Tetapi situasi yang sekarang yang berlaku ialah pencarum ataupun pekerja sebenarnya kadang-kadang memerlukan suntikan tunai tambahan daripada beberapa punca, dan KWSP telah mengambil kira situasi ini. Bermula pandemik, kita lihat mekanisme yang dibenarkan ataupun yang dilakukan oleh KWSP ialah pengeluaran secara one-off. Tetapi ini tidak sesuai untuk jangka masa panjang kerana ia boleh menjejaskan strategi pelaburan KWSP, dan juga untuk pencarum pula macam terpaksa meminta-minta, terpaksa menunggu bila akan lagi dapat peluang untuk menggunakan sebahagian wang cabaran mereka. Oleh itu, pengenalan akaun fleksibel ini adalah sebagai kemudahan yang kekal kepada pencarum untuk boleh mengeluarkan wang carumannya bila-bila masa, tetapi terhad kepada jumlah tertentu dan tertakluk kepada kriteria tertentu. Tapi sekurang-kurangnya sudah ada orang kata kestabilan ataupun ketentuan bahawa inilah jumlah yang boleh dikeluarkan pada bila-bila masa, dan sekarang terpulang kepada pencarum itu sendiri untuk menguruskan ataupun mengendalikan kewangan dia dan juga jumlah caruman yang hendak digunakan di bawah akaun fleksibel ini.
Dan kita lihat akaun ketiga iaitu akaun fleksibel adalah sedikit berbeza antara akaun persaraan dan juga akaun kesejahteraan yang mempunyai beberapa syarat sebelum kita dapat keluarkannya. Tapi untuk akaun tiga ni tanpa perlu apa-apa sebarang syarat kita dapat mengeluarkannya. Jadi sudah tentu apabila diberikan flexibility, kita harus lihat juga kepada kesedaran dan pendidikan iaitu setiap pencarum ahli. Apabila kita tahu ia perlu menyusuli usaha ini agar ahli pencarum lebih memahami how signifikan akaun ini kepada mereka dan lebih peka dan bersedia untuk mengurus kewangan mereka dengan lebih cekap selepas ini. Jadi, Doktor, sejauh manakah pendidikan kesedaran yang perlu diterapkan ketika ini dan berapa segeranya iaitu literasi kewangan perlu ditingkatkan dalam kalangan masyarakat, terutamanya pencarum?
Ya, kita akui literasi kewangan ataupun pemahaman tentang bagaimana menguruskan kewangan individu itu masih lagi di tahap yang rendah di negara kita. Oleh itu, apabila pengenalan akaun flexibility oleh KWSP ini memerlukan lonjakan ataupun keazaman daripada setiap pencarum itu untuk memastikan bahawa mereka mampu menguruskan kewangan mereka. Ini kerana bukan sahaja ianya berkisar kepada berapa banyak yang kita akan dapat setiap bulan dan berapa yang kita kena belanjakan supaya kita ada lebihan gunaan untuk simpanan dan juga pelaburan. Tetapi cabaran yang dihadapi pada masa sekarang adalah lebih kepada mengelakkan juga kita daripada terjebak dalam pelaburan yang sebenarnya akan menekan ataupun menyebabkan kita lebih kerugian. Dan satu pada masa sama juga cabaran yang dihadapi adalah mudah sekarang ini untuk orang melakukan scam. Kita lihat pelbagai teknik yang dilakukan oleh scammer setiap bulan. Kita lihat banyak kaedah baru diperkenalkan oleh mereka ni untuk memastikan mana-mana individu tu tidak orang kata mampu, orang kata mengenal pasti mana yang betul, mana yang tidak. Oleh itu kalau kita lihat keperluan untuk literasi itu amat penting dan ianya bukan sahaja di peringkat individu kena harus belajar, tetapi pendedahan itu juga harus dilakukan oleh semua pihak. KWSP juga boleh memainkan peranan penerangan tentang bagaimana wang yang dibawakan fleksibel ni boleh diuruskan dan juga majikan dan juga kita lihat kalau di peringkat lebih besar kerajaan persekutuan negeri, badan NGO dan sebagainya. Dan ianya adalah pendidikan dan pemahaman kewangan secara berterusan dan sekurang-kurangnya kalau kita lihat akaun fleksibel ni memandangkan dia ada had caruman setiap bulan pun masuk 10% saja. Sekurang-kurangnya kalau pencarum ini mengalami kesukaran pada permulaan, mungkin dia kurang pemahaman literasi, mungkin dia keluarkan semua habis, tak dapat apa-apa pulangan. Sekurang-kurangnya bila masuk balik caruman selepas ni, dia ada ruang untuk belajar daripada kesilapan dan kembali menguruskannya dengan lebih baik.
Doktor, dan mungkin dengan adanya akaun tambahan, akaun ketiga, akaun fleksibel ini mungkin ada yang kata mungkin peninglah selepas ini untuk uruskan iaitu kewangan ataupun terutama persaraan mereka dengan banyaknya 3 akaun ini. Tapi kita tak nak menjadikan akaun fleksibel ini sebagai iaitu tekanan tambahan kepada mereka, tetapi ia mendorong sebagai benefit kepada mereka. Jadi bagaimana dengan adanya akaun ketiga, akaun fleksibel ini mampu memberi pendekatan yang lebih berkesan dalam merancang persaraan yang stabil, mampan, terutamanya bagi penduduk di Malaysia?
Ya, kalau kita lihatlah pecahan kali ini sebenarnya akan membolehkan kita menyimpan lebih banyak untuk bersara. Sebab daripada dulu 70% sekarang meningkat kepada 75%. Sekurang-kurangnya caruman kita akan lebih banyak untuk bersara. Pada masa yang sama ada ruang untuk kita keluarkan di bawah akaun fleksibel. Namun yang lebih penting di sini ialah bagaimana kita dapat meningkatkan jumlah caruman dan juga peratusan caruman yang ini boleh dilakukan apabila kita meningkatkan kemahiran kita, upskilling, reskilling supaya kita dapat gaji yang lebih kompetitif, supaya gaji lebih tinggi dan juga majikan juga mampu untuk memberi caruman daripada majikan yang lebih tinggi. Semua ini untuk memastikan bahawa apabila caruman masuk ke dalam akaun kita setiap bulan, jumlahnya adalah cukup besar yang membolehkan kita dapat mencapai simpanan asas lah. Kalau KWSP kata selepas bersara tu kena ada sekurang-kurangnya 240,000 dan turut juga memastikan bahawa akaun fleksibel ini mempunyai wang yang cukup untuk membantu kita di masa kecemasan. Itu fokusnya, bukan setakat menguruskan wang yang kita boleh keluar daripada akaun fleksibel setiap bulan ke setiap masa, tetapi untuk macam mana kita pastikan caruman kita kekal meningkat, bertambah setiap tahun kerana kita telah memperolehi gaji yang lebih kompetitif.
Dan beberapa pakar berpandangan KWSP juga bukan satu-satunya organisasi yang bertanggungjawab dari segi untuk menambah baik kesejahteraan masyarakat. Namun ia boleh menjadi iaitu sesuatu contoh daripada segi pelaksanaan, restruktur, penstrukturan semula. Jadi siapa dan kita boleh lihat siapa antara agensi, organisasi perlu turut pikul tanggungjawab mencontohi peranan KWSP dalam konteks organisasi mereka sendiri dan bagaimana Indo dapat melihat kepada sumber-sumber lain dalam membimbing mereka dalam mengurus simpanan dan juga aset mereka, Doktor.
Ya, memang ianya penting untuk semua pihak memainkan peranan dan kita lihat untuk pencarum yang bergaji rendah, yang sentiasa dibebankan dengan kos hidup yang tinggi. Mungkin KWSP ini bukannya satu-satunya agensi yang boleh bantu mereka. Mungkin cadangan mereka tak cukup banyak dan mungkin apa yang mereka keluarkan tidak cukup. Oleh itu, ianya salah satu cara untuk bantu mereka, tetapi banyak lagi kata kaedah inisiatif yang boleh digunakan untuk membantu mereka yang betul-betul terkesan. Sebagai contoh, kita lihat untuk B40, kerajaan melalui pelbagai inisiatif sumbangan tunai rahmah, subsidi bersasar dan juga jabatan kebajikan masyarakat. Semua ni membantu mereka yang terkesan. Dan kalau kita lihat pihak kewangan seperti bank, insurans, pelaburan, semua juga boleh memainkan peranan untuk membantu mereka semua ini memahami literasi yang lebih, kewangan yang lebih berkesan untuk masa depan mereka.
Baik, saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Madya Dr. Ahmad Rozman Abdul Latif, merupakan pengarah program MBA Putra Business School PBS dan mengenai KWSP dalam usaha untuk melestarikan iaitu persaraan bergerak ke hadapan. Ini adalah antara perkongsian yang telah dikongsikan oleh doktor dan sudah tentu setiap perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astroawani.com dan semua platform digital Astro Awani. Dan banyak lagi perkembangan mengenai Forum Ekonomi Dunia WF yang akan dibawakan selepas ini.
Gempur di Awani 7.45.
Abang ni tak habis-habis ulang benda sama je. Abang macam ada sorokkan sesuatu daripada Dian.
Kebenaran semakin jelas.
Dian bahagia.
Kenapa Abang Am tanya Dian macam tu?
Saya takkan sia-siakan peluang ini.
Perbuatan Rif ni umpama menipu Dian hidup-hidup. Saya sudah dibenci Rif lebih pada sebelumnya.
Nasihat atau hasutan cemburu.
Sebab itu Dian tak tahu. Perangai Dian jadi macam tu sebab dia tengah mengandungnya ke?
Takdir itu milik aku di Astro Ria dan Astro Girl.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro Awani menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
I think we're all realizing that the world is definitely between orders. We had one order, post-Cold War order. That order is not there anymore. But we don't exactly know what the new order is either. And from history, I think we know that between orders there is a lot of disorder. There's competition for power. It's also competition for then being the most competitive nation economically and etc. We also heard earlier today at the opening plenary that the global economy is doing better than we expected a year ago, but geopolitically we are facing a kind of a recession. So the biggest risk for the global economy now is that geopolitically something comes out of control. And we were very close to this a few weeks ago that could have ended in a full-fledged war between Israel and Iran. Fortunately, that did not happen, but doesn't mean that those challenges are not there anymore. I think we're not out of the woods. We also know that there is competition between the two largest economies in the world, the so-called G2, US and China. It's 40% of the global economy. So it's not insignificant. We'll have Secretary Blinken arriving tomorrow. We also have seen in the last weeks, there's been big discussions about Ukraine. And I think EU is also looking at how they prepare themselves for a situation where EU will take more responsibility for its own security. So we have an amazing panel. to discuss this. To my right, we have Josep Borrell. He is the High Rep of the European Union and a key player in this. Then we have, almost doesn't need a presentation here, at least not in the kingdom, His Highness Prince Faisal Al Saud, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia. And then we have Mr. Ali Sabri, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. And then we have Qian Liu, the expert economist with the focus on China, former managing director of the Economist Group in China. So I think we are, of course, all interested in trying to see the implications medium-long term on the current situation. But we also need to understand what is really going on. And in the region, I would like to start with you, Your Highness. I mentioned the Iran-Israel situation that could have escalated. We don't even know what that would have ended in. Not all nations do have an Iron Dome, to put it that way, but this also was collaboration there we haven't seen in a long time. I think we're all now very much following the latest Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire and release of hostages that is now with Hamas, and we're also told that if that is not agreed on, you can have a full escalation of the war in Gaza again, with Israel then starting to go into Raqqa. We know that the kingdom plays a pivotal role here. Israel also wants a deal with Saudi Arabia, but I guess that doesn't come for free. Maybe we could start then with the current situation in Gaza, your reflections of what did not escalate with Iran. Secretary Blinken coming tomorrow, wanting also to work on a possible comprehensive deal with GCC and especially Saudi Arabia. But I guess that deal will also have to be a real path towards peace between the Israelis and also the Palestinians. So on those few easy questions, over to you.
And in 2 minutes or less.
On that one, you can get 2.5.
You're too generous, Morgan. Look, situation in Gaza obviously is a catastrophe by every measure. Humanitarian, but also a complete failing of the existing political system to deal with that crisis. Is that a reflection of what you mentioned, that we are in transition, or is it a reflection that the existing bodies of international governance are inadequate? That's something maybe we will go into in the panel as well. Certainly the situation as it is now is already catastrophic, and we are facing an exponential expansion of it if we see an incursion into Gaza, which is possible if we don't reach a ceasefire imminently. We hear that there's a proposal on the table. We hope that that proposal is sufficient for the ceasefire to come into place. But even if we have a ceasefire, we still have to deal with the repercussions of the conflict, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, beyond, in our region. We speak about impacts well beyond the current situation. So we have to work to address that. And one of the, and again, one of the frustrations that we have, and I'm sure many others have, is that the international mechanisms of security have not worked, even on something as basic as humanitarian access. The crisis is now in its 7th month, and we still are in an unending discussion of whether or not enough trucks are getting into Gaza. It's completely unreasonable and unacceptable. So the situation is dire, and there is potential for it to become even worse. That said, we in the region are not going to focus only on solving the crisis of the moment. We are going to look at how we can solve the bigger problem in the context of Gaza, that is a real commitment to a two-state solution. That is a credible, irreversible path to a Palestinian state. That's the only reasonable and credible solution that guarantees us from not having to come back to this same situation 2, 3, 4 years down the line. It's good that we hear most of our partners in the international community support that notion. Now we have to translate that into reality, and that's what we're engaged on. That's what we'll talk to Tony with. That's why Joseph is here. You know, our European partners are engaged. But we need to move from talk to action, to concrete steps, and it can't be left up to the warring parties. It has, you know, we, the international community, and especially those countries that have the most influence, the most impact, the Security Council has to step in. So that's briefly on Gaza, but I want to touch quickly on some of the points you made, first in the regional context. You know, certainly in our region, when it comes to the kingdom, but many others, we are focused on not competition, not conflict, but competition, on working, or rather on working on economic growth, economic development, and on being part of the transition from the old world order, as you've called it, to the new world order. And I think what's important in the broader context is that we make sure that it is competition, not conflict. And competition, if managed properly, can be a healthy thing. It can deliver benefits for all interested parties. It lowers cost, it delivers innovation and better investment. So that's where we need to focus. We need to focus on ensuring that this transition leads into competition and, where necessary to face global challenges, cooperation. You know, and a good example is climate change, but also, of course, peace and security. You know, we can compete and cooperate, and there are examples in our region. So that's I think, where we should focus our intention.
Thank you very much, and I think that's also the Vision 2030 that, as you mentioned, we saw numbers coming out now that the kingdom has, 6 years before the plan, been able to 50% of the economy, GDP, is now coming from the non-oil and gas sector. But, you know, there is no economic development if there is war and conflicts. And we know that no country in the world that is in a war has met the Sustainable Development Goals or the MDGs. So thank you. I'm then moving to you, Youssef Borrell. You heard the Saudi Foreign Minister saying that we can deal with competition. We always had competition. But conflict we will need to avoid. We're in a transitional period. We don't know what this new order will be, but currently there is a lot of disorder. So how to deal with that? And also the European Union is a big actor in this, but also has been through a rough time. The gas was coming from Russia, the security was coming from DC, and China was an important market. So there is a lot of pivoting necessary also in the EU, and there is a growing discussion about strategic autonomy, like Macron mentioned, or maybe European interdependence that I think you and von der Leyen has mentioned. So where do you see this going, and what is the European vision on this new order?
Look, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful place and conference. When I was a child, the world was divided between the North, the East, and the West. East and West, each one with an atomic bomb, facing each other. Later, the South emerged, and we start talking about North and South. And now we talk North, South, East, West, which shows that there is not a clear understanding of the world as it is. Competition, good. The problem is not competition. The problem is confrontation. And there is confrontation because there are many and more poles, actors, and less rules. And the rules are not enforced. The power has been redistributed, and an engineer will be the system naturally tends to be more disorder. More actors, less rules, disorder. Which are the consequences of this new scenario? First, the distribution of power has changed the relations of forces in benefit of Asia, mainly what we call the North or the Northwest has been decreasing its importance. Southeast Asia has increased, China also, and competition has become a conflict, and the war among states is back. Russia against Ukraine, let's hope that nothing like this could happen in the Middle East. But by the time being, we have another war, not an interest state, because Palestine is still not a state, but it's a war of high intensity with many casualties. There is a real danger that the war among states becomes a reality. We should not open the Pandora box of new wars. Second, is a war not only with arms, bombs, and rockets, it's a war about narrative. It's a war about memories, about experiences. And we see here in the region that it's very difficult to overcome this kind of heritage. Geography matters. I've been told geography doesn't matter anymore, globalization, blah, blah, blah. In Ukraine, it's a fight for the land. And here in Gaza and in Palestine, it's a war for the land. Two people who are fighting for the same land. And the only solution is to share this land. The third implication is that many people in the South believe that this new scenario gives them more opportunities, and they are hedging. They don't want to be in one side for everything, everywhere, all the time. It depends. Maybe for that it will be with you, maybe it will be against you for another reason. And the small powers don't see the interest of abiding by the rules if the great powers don't do it. And then this makes the world more transactional, less multilateral, less agreement, less rules, and more transactions. And the big risk of decoupling. Decoupling from the technological point of view, two big different blocks. Decoupling from the point of view of trade, decoupling from the point of view of values. This requires, in order to overcome this situation, more trust. Yes. Why we have lost trust? Because we have discovered that dependencies become a weapon. If I trust you, I don't care if I am dependent on you, because I trust you. But when I see that my dependency from you is being used as a weapon against me, then dependencies becomes dangerous. And I reduce dependencies, and that's why the whole world tends to isolate each other on this decoupling economically from the point of view of values, narrative, traits. And this is bad for the humankind, because never as today, we need more cooperation. Climate, demography, technology, everything requires more cooperation, and we have less cooperation and trust. What we have to do is to start respecting the existing rules, to change many of them which are not adequate for the world the way it is, which is not the world as it was when I was born in the 40s, but we don't have to invent the wheel. Many things could work if they work. And why don't work? Because there is a big gap between what we say and what we do. We cannot preach by example because we are not perfect. But let at least to say that we, the Europeans, we have not used our veto right in the Security Council for years and years. And we have not been blocking any initiative with respect to the war in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a short follow-up question. I guess the calculus also has changed in Europe. Europe burned its fingers on not diversifying its energy. I guess
certainly
Europe also has exported a lot to certain markets that has to be diversified, and a lot of the eggs on the security side is based in Washington, D.C. So how is Europe gonna deal with that, but still then as the largest market in the world, and you know, it's also 17% of the global economy, so it's still a really big player, but it's only strong if also it keeps together, and there is different views, and you also have populist forces in Europe, but there's also more expectations on Europe from the global south, from the east, to also be able to play an important role in this very fragile world of competition. So I'm really curious if you think Europe will is it ready for this role, and how will it play that role?
It's true that there is a caricature saying that the Europeans have been basing our prosperity on the cheap gas coming from Russia, on the security umbrella coming from Washington, and the great market opportunity and investment coming from China. It's a caricature, but as every caricature has certain elements of being true. Yes, we have been building a strong dependency on Russian gas, 40% before the war. Now it's less than 10%. Yes, we have been relying a lot on the security provided by NATO, and maybe it's not going to be always like this, depending who is ruling Washington. And yes, certainly China has offered some members of the European Union a great opportunity to export technology and to be expanding trade and economy and prosperity. We have to adapt to a new world. Everybody has to do it. Certainly the world in the future will be based more on renewables than in fossil fuels, but there is still a long way to go. Certainly we have to take our part of the burden and be more responsible with respect to our own security, and this requires to put the capacity, resources, and the political will. And third, we have to understand that the world economy today is based on a lot of new champions and countries who have shown an incredible capacity of technological innovation. All that requires the Europeans to be more united, and this will be a little bit my legacy. Be more united, please, because you are too small to survive in a world of giants. Take more into consideration the priorities of the other people, because many times it's not a matter of values, it's a matter of priorities, and others don't share your same priorities, and try to go hand in hand your speech and your actions.
Thank you, Xian. We know that one of the big contests, and maybe the biggest of this century, is now between the two so-called superpowers, at least economically and increasingly military, the US and China. 40–45% of the global economy. Secretary Blinken will arrive tomorrow from his visit. He saw President Xi Jinping, also spent considerable time with then Foreign Minister Wang Yi. How do you see this relationship developing? I think President Biden has seen its extreme competition between the two nations. That's the term he used. It's still competition, not conflict, but extreme competition. Do you see a future where there will be competition and collaboration, or do you foresee increased escalation in the conflict between these two big powers? And of course, we know there's an upcoming election also in the US, and there is less growth in China than it used to be, but it's still growing.
Thank you for the question. Let me borrow the starting line of Vice President of when I was a child. when I was a child, that was a time when China was so poor. We didn't have enough food or meat. We could even only have meat for dumplings and new clothes during the Chinese New Year. That was a time when China was just starting to open up and grow. And that was a time when learning American accent English was a lot more popular than learning the British accent. People looked up to the dominant power of the US. China wanted to grow and wanted to become better. And back at school, you'd be the popular kid if you speak English, and you would be chosen to welcome a delegation of American students. But time have changed big time. 2008 was a big sort of milestone there. When the great financial crisis happened, all of a sudden China realized, wait a second, we are able to find ways to grow ourselves out of it. But look at the economies that we used to look up to, especially Europe and US. US didn't handle it very well. Still nowadays, there are certain countries within Europe that 2008 till now, 16 years, certain European countries, their GDP and income still have not recovered to the pre-2008 levels. So that was a big time when China's perceptions and sentiments towards itself and towards the world have changed. And back to what you're asking about US and China. I'm usually an optimist, but not so on the US-China relationships. I fear that situations will get worse before it becomes better again. Even though at the moment we're seeing the bilateral conversation have resumed, especially after COVID, I fear that is very temporary. Especially, you mentioned this is an election year. With all the polarization going on in the US, if anything, China is the only thing that unites the United States of America. Like, that is the one thing that the two parties can agree on. And so the negative sentiment on China is unfortunately the thing that will continue to be, and the election year will just fire that up even more. And on China's side, I fear that if the economy will not grow as quickly, as stably as people would like, then the temptation would be to use US as an scapegoat. So with that being in the picture, I'm not very optimistic about US-China relationship. And we look around the world, how can we sort of balance that out? In a physics perspective, right, the most solid format and relationship is a triangle. So in a multipolar world that we live right now, we have US and China. What and who would be the third polar? Before we were looking at Europe, hoping Europe would be the solid third polar. But there are times that even within Europe, the nations have different interests and priorities. So Europe may not necessarily always be the third angle that we go to. And perhaps it would be the third countries, or the third nations that are stuck in between. Many countries have unfortunately been stuck in this bilateral relationship. They have been forced to choose side, and we've seen a lot of disruptions when it comes to supply chains, technologies, economies, et cetera, and many more. Some countries have benefited a bit out of it, but overall, globally, the world is suffering from a not so healthy China-US relationship. And I think, in a way, for the third nations to also come up together and tell US and China. You know, we say sometimes international relations are like marriages of conveniences. Then for the other friends, it's about time to come together and tell the couple, we've had enough. You need to come together and find solutions. Otherwise, you're not serving yourselves or the world collectively. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You referenced when you grew up and China was still a developing country. Today, China is around a little bit more than $10,000 US per capita, maybe 12, 13. The big question is, will China be able then to go into a $30,000, $40,000 US economy? So there are those that are concerned that it can end up in like a middle income trap. And if you look at the fundamentals today in China, what's your view? Do you think China will continue to grow at a speed where it can then become like a upper middle income country? There are things working for China in that respect. 12 million students graduating every year, 2 million of them being engineers, being also quite leading in some of the new technologies. But then we see the shrinking workforce. We also see challenges on our investments in some areas. Where do you see this socialist market economy going? Because that's a challenging thing to also make sure that all these different priorities come together in a policy that leads to exceptional growth. And second, if that growth is not coming, you say that there is also then reasons to be concerned that you could see some Machiavelli steps, knowing that if you have a problem at home, you can always then of course, be more looking at mobilizing your country towards something outside your country. So that would be interesting to hear.
Yes, that is a very important question. So especially after COVID, people ask, where is Chinese economy? Where is it going? And the answer in a way depends on what your reference point is. If people are looking at China before COVID, sort of 6%, 8%, or even 10%, that is not possible at all. And in fact, when we look at the current statistics, for instance, the youth unemployment rate now is beyond 20%. Last year, China grew by 5.2%, much slower compared to before. And when you go to sort of big shopping malls, luxury goods shops, before you have to wait in line, and now there's places that feels very empty. So it's very, very different from before COVID. But then there's the other argument saying that Chinese economy is collapsing, and I would completely disagree with that. Even with 5.2% growth of China, you mentioned China's average income. So just to put things into perspective, China's GDP is about $18 trillion a year. That is the second largest economy in the world, and larger than number 3, 4, 5, 6 combined. That is Germany, Japan, India, and the UK. And with just 5% of China's growth, every year China grows an additional, we're in Saudi right now, every year China grows an additional Saudi economy. And World Economic Forum's Switzerland, every year China produces an entire new Switzerland. So
but
that
maybe
is
better to use that latter example.
No, but so the idea is that given the sheer size of China, 5% is phenomena. And 20 years ago when China joined WTO, it was only 4% of the global economy, and right now it's 18%. So there are a lot of problems in the Chinese economy, but there's still quite some engines sort of going on. The problem right now is there is a lack of confidence, consumers, investors, etc. So the problem is how to get those back. But unless there goes with a hard landing scenarios, otherwise China is on its way to overtake US as the largest economy in about 15 years' time or so. And I think it's a critical time for us to review China's rise. As you said, I do believe that the rise of China will be one of the key defining themes of this century. And China is finding its way and is learning how to deal with the rise of its power, how to use that power, and how to integrate with the rest of the world. And China does make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. Well, all countries do, but China's mistakes will be a lot more noticeable and consequential. At the same time, I think it's also very important for other countries to review the rise of China and accept that China is rising, and learn to give room, if not to welcome the rise of China. And I think that in the longer term would give the entire world and humanity a more balanced power structure. And China will do things differently. May not always be the way that the current existing world order likes, but it will be different, and the rise of China is here to stay.
Thank you. Thank you for that very thoughtful answer. Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, we are saying that in South Asia and also in Asia we have several examples where another very fast growing economy, the fastest growing of the large economies in the world now, by the way, India with 8%. We're seeing more and more India and China meeting each other. We're seeing it in Bangladesh, we see it in Nepal, we see it in Myanmar, but definitely also in the Maldives and in Sri Lanka. And as Sri Lanka has been in the middle of this, we had huge investments, FDIs from China, but you've been through a very tough economic period with a lot of structural changes. So maybe 2 words, because I think we need to know if you're getting out of the woods, or I guess there is like a light in the tunnel now on the economy side, but then how do Sri Lanka as an island but an important country in this region maneuver between India and China? That would be interesting. I'm not so sure how interested you are in sharing all your thoughts on it, but please feel free.
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you very much for that question, and I also must use this opportunity to congratulate my friend, His Highness and the government of Saudi Arabia for having this wonderful conference here, and also WEF to bring in this in outside the traditional venues so that there is a new perspective coming in. These topics would not have been discussed with this detail if it is not in Saudi Arabia. So therefore, congratulations on that for both organizers. Yes, Sri Lanka, compared to what we were 2 years ago, had come out of the woods. Our inflations are really under control, which was 70% running. Now it's about 2.5%. Our rupee had appreciated about 25% during the last 2 years. Tourists are coming back, and there are a lot of competition in Sri Lanka for investment from global powers. I see as an opportunity. It comes, of course, there is strategic autonomy for all of us, like the Europe, Sri Lanka also. We would like to work as a sovereign state with everyone. We would like to have multiple choices. I know sometimes it's very difficult. Probably we are being coerced, or at least attempts are made for us to take choices which are not very voluntarily. I think no global South country would appreciate that. We would always like to take those choices which is available to us with everyone, you know, with the global South and the global North. So if you ask me about the global South perspective, there is a lack of confidence between two global North and the North. Yes, there is. That comes with a lot of reasons. There is very little walking the talk. You know, we always see a lot of lectures as to how you should govern your country, democratic values, human rights, green energy, climate change, but very little in terms of delivering on it. You know, countries in the global South need the support of the global North on having access to low-cost funding, debt relief, transition of latest technology, the digital divide. So I think this is time for the global North to walk the talk and collaborate with it. I do agree during the last, as you told at the beginning of your introduction, since the end of the Cold War, the world has seen a relative calm and peace. Peace and stability is very, very important. As a result of which, as you pointed out in the morning, the economies or the GDPs have grown 8 times despite the challenges. The foremost of that and the precondition was peace and stability. So as we, members of the Global South, would like and request the Global North and the players who have so much of power, with great power comes great responsibility, don't close the channels of diplomacy. Open channels of communication. Decoupling could be suicidal. De-risking, I do understand that. You can't put all your eggs into one basket. So it is there, Global South also will probably benefit. Once you decouple, I don't know, the growth will affect, and that will actually affect your market. For example, if you take the Chinese-US competition, one of the biggest market for the American, one of the proudest product of iPhone is in China. So China growing is good for US also and some of their products. So therefore, what we would urge as Global South, that people who matters and the powers who matters sit and talk about it and avoid double standard. And we always take up this position, and I always advocated the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because that's the underlying problem. Until you resolve that and give effect to the 1967 UN resolution of two-state solution, as His Highness told me, shared his views, you will probably have a short-term pause, but it will recur with even greater vengeance. So we don't want that. We need to once and for all a solution to this, and a same kind of a solution for the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. So we need a world which promote peace, not confrontation, which collaborate, which compete, but not confront each other. That's the perspective of the Global South whenever we talk to our friends in the Global South and the countries in the Global South.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. Unfortunately, the last minutes I will deal with two wars. One in Ukraine and the other one in Gaza. The latter, I think, as the Minister just now alluded to, and I think I heard His Highness mentioning this also earlier, the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the lack of a two-state solution is, of course, also an important source of a lot of the conflicts we're seeing in the region, and also legitimization from different players for their actions. But I'll come back to that. But we haven't spent a lot of time on the second war in Ukraine, and Mr. Vice President Youssef, no, the Americans decided last minute to contribute with 62 or 61 more, the 62 billions of support to Ukraine. But we also know that every war needs to come to an end. But what kind of end can we see of this Ukraine war without compromising on territorial integrity, and at the same time sending a signal to Mr. Putin that this cannot go on, but at the same time there also will need to be solutions. Do you see any solutions, or is it too early to talk about them? They need to continue this for some more time.
That's a question for Mr. Putin or for me?
I think it's for you, since he's not here. And I'm not sure if he would have answered it either. I do guess a bit what the answer would have been, but we'll draw on your experience and insight.
Look, it's a moment in my life that I will never forget. 2 weeks before the war started, I was in the Donbass. I was visiting Ukraine. It was on the 6th of January. The war started 1 month later.
Yeah, you have to talk a little bit louder.
I was in Donbass, and the drums of war were already there. You could see through the window. And I had a meeting on the Prime Minister's office. And he asked me a simple question. They are going to invade us. They are going to invade us, be sure. When this happens, what are you going to do? Are you going to ask us to surrender? Or are you going to support us, not with soldiers, I know, but with the military capacity we need to defend ourselves? What are you going to do? White flag or support? At that moment, I couldn't give an answer. Later, we gave an answer. We support you. And I think that we have to continue giving this answer. Otherwise, the history of the world will be completely different. And I don't know when Putin will stop this war, because he started the war. I'm afraid that he will wait for the American elections, at least. And in the meantime, we have to continue supporting the people in Ukraine. The Europeans will not go to die for the Donbass, but we could avoid the Ukrainians to have to die for the Donbass longer. And I know this is a difficult question, and many people could say, well, for how long do we have to spend so much money? Well, if we committed to support Ukraine when the war started, we have to continue supporting Ukraine until the Ukrainians are able to resist, and until Putin decides to stop this war. But it will not happen soon. Sorry.
No, thank you. I'm also conscious about the time. I would love this to go on a little bit further. Also, I heard, Yusuf, your view on the China, but I said that we will also have the last words on the other war going on in Gaza. I think this time, though, Prince Faisal, the war is different. Last time, there was also an international willingness to rebuild Gaza without any guarantees for a path for a two-state solution. No understanding really between Hamas and the Israeli government. The international community spent billions of US dollars to then just rebuild. The devastations were not at that level as today, but it was still a lot of investments needed to rebuild the electricity system, water sanitation, a lot of buildings. But today there is a total disaster. It is a war zone. And what will happen with the 2.5 million people there if there is no appetite also from the donors to start to rebuild this without the political path? Well, what kind of future will the people there have? And of course, it increases the pressure on a political solution. But you, as we know from negotiations, you can bring the horses to the well, but you cannot force them to drink the water. And with the current government in Israel, I think there is maybe not the biggest appetite on negotiations for a two-state solution. We will also need to know more clearly if there's a majority in the cabinet in favor of that. But if you look at the path forward, I guess the GCC and especially also Saudi have a lot of incentives for Israel if they agree on this. So it would be interesting to hear your best case scenario and the worst case scenario and the most realistic scenario.
I mean, I'm not going to go into scenarios, but I will try and answer some of those questions. First, on reconstruction, there's a UN report out just very recently that says that just to remove the rubble will take 15 years. Reconstruction, possibly up to 30 years. So this idea that we can talk about half measures and to discuss, well, where are the 2.5 million people of Gaza going to go without addressing how we make sure that something like this doesn't happen again, I think that's patently ridiculous. And anybody who tries to take that approach, I think, is sincerely misguided. And certainly from our perspective, it is in everybody's interest in the region. Our interest, the interest of the Palestinians, the interest of the Israelis, the interest of the global community of nations, that we find a pathway to resolve this issue once and for all, because that's the only way we are going to avoid, first of all, a repeat, but also we're going to avoid that the suffering that has happened on all sides happens in vain. This is just not an approach that is possible. I want to say that the scenarios and all of these things, it's difficult, but there are pathways and there are mechanisms within the toolbox of the international community that can overcome even the resistance of any party, any spoiler on any side, to stop that path. If we all agree that the Palestinian state and giving the Palestinians their right is the solution that gives everybody what they need, security, stability, their rights, then we should all decide we're going to invest all of our resources in making that happen. And if we make that decision, the pathway will unfold before us, even if there are those that will try to stop it. There are levers clear and there are levers hidden that can push us in that direction. So I want to be hopeful, and I will try to be hopeful, and I know that we as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will do everything we can to push in that direction. And hopefully the international community, given everything that has happened and given the risks involved in not doing the right thing, will come along, and we're working with our partners, the Europeans among them, many others, to try and translate that intent into reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the panel deserves big applause. I really enjoyed every second, even if it was dealing with quite a grim reality. But that's the world we're living in. Thank you. Shukran.
We have to try and dream.